The night sky stretches above us like a dark canvas dotted with ancient lights. Each star carries stories older than human memory, whispers of secrets that have traveled across millennia to reach our eyes tonight. But what if I told you that hidden among these celestial tales lies one of the most extraordinary and controversial books ever written, a text so powerful that religious authorities try to erase it from history itself? Tonight, we're going to journey together through the complete story of the Book of Enoch, not just fragments or summaries, but the entire epic from beginning to end. As you close your eyes and let sleep wash over you, you'll walk alongside one of humanity's most mysterious figures through realms beyond imagination. This isn't your typical bedtime story. The Book of Enoch contains visions that shaped how we think about angels and demons, heaven and hell, good and evil. It tells of fallen angels who abandoned their heavenly posts for forbidden love, of giants who once walked the earth, and of cosmic secrets that were deemed too dangerous for ordinary minds to comprehend. For over 1,000 years, this ancient text remained hidden from the Western world, preserved only in the mountains of Ethiopia by monks who understood its true value. When it finally emerged from its long exile, scholars realized they had rediscovered a missing piece of religious history that would change everything we thought we knew about ancient faith and cosmic order. So settle in, get comfortable, and prepare to be transported to a world where the boundaries between heaven and earth blur, where angels make choices that doom civilizations, and where one righteous man receives visions that peer into the very heart of divine mystery. Let the ancient words of Enoch carry you into peaceful sleep as his extraordinary journey unfolds. The story begins in the earliest days of human history, when the world was young and the line between the divine and mortal realms was thin as morning mist. In those ancient times, there lived a man whose name would echo through the ages, though few would understand the true magnitude of what he witnessed. Enoch walked among the descendants of Seth in a world that still remembered Eden's lost paradise. The earth bore fruit easily then, and the seasons flowed in perfect rhythm. Yet even in this time of relative innocence, shadows were gathering at the edges of creation, and cosmic forces were stirring that would soon shatter the peaceful order of things. According to the ancient genealogies, Enoch was the 7th generation from Adam himself. His father Jared lived in an age when the sons of God first began to notice the daughters of men, though few understood the catastrophic implications of such divine attention. Enoch grew up hearing whispered stories of strange beings who watched humanity from afar, celestial guardians whose true nature remained shrouded in mystery. But Enoch was different from his contemporaries. Where others lived their lives focused on earthly concerns, tending flocks and tilling soil, Enoch possessed an unusual hunger for divine truth. He spent long nights studying the movement of stars, tracking the intricate patterns of seasons, and listening for voices that others could not hear. His neighbors often found him standing alone on hilltops, gazing upward as if expecting some momentous revelation to descend from the heavens above. What they didn't realize was that Enoch had begun to see things that mortal eyes were never meant to perceive. Visions flickered at the corners of his sight, glimpses of radiant beings moving through dimensions beyond normal perception. Sometimes he heard music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, harmonies that spoke of realms where physics bent to accommodate pure spirit. As Enoch matured and took a wife, fathering the son who would become known as Methuselah, these mystical experiences intensified rather than faded. He developed a reputation as a man of unusual wisdom and righteousness, someone who walked closer to the divine than ordinary mortals dared attempt. People began to seek him out for guidance, drawn by something in his presence that spoke of deeper knowledge and unshakable peace. Yet Enoch remained humble about his growing spiritual gifts. He understood that he was merely a vessel, chosen for reasons beyond his comprehension, to witness truths that would normally remain hidden from human understanding. When visions came, he received them with reverence and careful attention, knowing that each revelation carried weight beyond immediate comprehension. The world around Enoch was changing in ways that troubled his righteous heart. Reports filtered in from distant regions of strange occurrences, unnatural phenomena that suggested the cosmic order was being disturbed. Some spoke of beings of extraordinary size and strength appearing among human populations, creatures whose very existence seemed to violate the natural laws that governed mortal life. Others whispered of forbidden knowledge being shared in secret gatherings, arts and skills that seemed to come from sources beyond human discovery. The working of metals became more sophisticated, weapons grew deadlier, and certain women began adorning themselves with ornaments and cosmetics that enhanced their beauty in ways that seemed almost supernatural in their effect. Enoch observed these developments with growing concern. His enhanced perception allowed him to see connections that others missed, to recognize patterns that pointed toward a fundamental disruption in the relationship between heaven and earth. Something was happening in the unseen realms that would soon manifest in ways that would reshape human destiny forever. The answer to his questions came in a way that no amount of preparation could have made less overwhelming. It began on a night when Enoch had withdrawn to a secluded valley for prayer and contemplation, seeking divine guidance about the troubling signs he had been witnessing. The stars above seemed unusually bright, pulsing with an inner light that made the darkness itself appear luminous. As Enoch knelt in prayer, the very air around him began to shimmer and change. The familiar landscape of the valley wavered like a reflection in disturbed water, and suddenly he found himself standing in the presence of beings whose radiance made the sun seem pale by comparison. These were angels in their true form, creatures of such pure light and power that his mortal eyes could barely process their appearance. Two figures stood before him, tall beyond human scale, their faces shining with an inner fire that spoke of eternal purpose. Their garments seemed woven from starlight itself, and when they moved, the space around them rippled with waves of divine energy. Despite their overwhelming presence, their voices carried a gentleness that immediately calmed Enoch's initial terror. "Fear not, Enoch," spoke the first angel, his words resonating through dimensions Enoch had never imagined existed. "You have been chosen to witness things that have been hidden since the foundations of the world were laid. What you are about to see and hear will burden your heart, but it must be recorded for generations yet to come." The second angel stepped forward, and Enoch could see sorrow mixed with determination in his luminous features. "The watchers have fallen," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic tragedy. "Those who were set to guard and guide humanity have abandoned their posts and descended to earth with forbidden desires burning in their hearts." Enoch struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what he was being told. The Watchers were celestial beings of immense power and responsibility, angels whose duty was to observe human development and ensure that divine will was carried out on earth. The thought that such exalted creatures could fall from grace seemed impossible, yet the evidence of their transgression was beginning to manifest all around him. "They have looked upon the daughters of men and found them beautiful," the first angel continued, his voice heavy with divine grief. 200 of them, led by one called Semjaza, have sworn an oath together and descended to Mount Hermon. There they have taken human wives and taught forbidden arts that were never meant for mortal minds to comprehend. the implications hit Enoch like physical blows. These fallen angels, beings of immense power and knowledge, had not only broken their sacred covenant by mingling with humanity, but had also begun sharing celestial secrets that would corrupt and ultimately destroy the natural order. Their offspring would be creatures of hybrid nature, possessing both angelic power and human willfulness, a combination that spelled disaster for all creation. "But why am I chosen to know these things?" Enoch asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of such knowledge felt crushing, too vast and terrible for any mortal mind to bear. Yet even as he spoke, he felt a strange peace settling over him, as if his very soul was being prepared and strengthened for the trials ahead. "Because you have walked righteously before the Most High," replied the second angel. "Because your heart seeks truth above comfort and wisdom above earthly pleasures. You will be our witness, our scribe, our messenger to both the fallen and the faithful. Through your words, future generations will understand what has transpired and what must come to pass." As the angels spoke, the landscape around Enoch continued to shift and transform. He realized that he was no longer standing in the familiar valley where his evening prayers had begun. Instead, he found himself at the threshold of realms that existed beyond normal space and time, dimensions where the laws of physics bent to accommodate spiritual realities that defied mortal understanding. The journey he was about to undertake would carry him through 7 heavens, each more wondrous and terrible than the last. He would witness the cosmic machinery that governed the movement of stars and seasons, the vast libraries where every human deed was recorded, and the throne room of the Almighty himself, blazing with light too pure for any created being to fully comprehend. But first he would be taken to witness the scene of the great transgression itself, to see with his own eyes the fallen watchers and their human wives, to observe the birth of the giants who would soon terrorize the earth, and to carry back a message of judgment that would seal the fate of those who had chosen rebellion over righteousness. The angels extended their hands toward Enoch, and as he reached out to touch them, he felt his physical form becoming lighter, more ethereal, as if his very substance was being refined and purified to withstand the journey ahead. The last thing he remembered of his earthly existence was the feeling of being lifted up, carried beyond the boundaries of the world he had always known, into realms where wonder and terror walked hand in hand through corridors of eternity. The ascent began slowly, as if the very fabric of reality needed time to adjust to his transformed presence. Enoch felt himself rising through layers of existence that mortal minds had never conceived, each level revealing new aspects of creation's hidden architecture. The familiar weight of his physical body had dissolved into something far more fluid, a form of pure consciousness wrapped in divine light. Below him, the earth grew smaller and smaller, until the valleys and mountains where he had spent his mortal years appeared as mere wrinkles on an ancient parchment. Yet even as the physical world receded, Enoch's perception expanded exponentially. He could see patterns and connections that had been invisible from his earthbound perspective, cosmic currents of energy that flowed between stars like rivers of liquid fire. The angels who guided him moved with purpose through dimensions that folded and unfolded around their passage. Sometimes they traveled through what appeared to be vast corridors of crystalline light, where the walls themselves sang with harmonies that told the story of creation's unfolding. Other times they passed through regions of absolute darkness, where silence reigned so complete that it became its own form of revelation. "Where are we going?" Enoch asked, though he wasn't certain if he spoke the words aloud or merely thought them. In this realm between realms, the distinction seemed meaningless. "To the place where it all began to unravel," replied one of his guides, his voice carrying notes of infinite sadness. "You must see the source of corruption before you can understand the scope of judgment that must follow. The Watchers chose their path freely, but their choice has consequences that ripple through all of creation." They descended now toward a mountain that rose from the earth like a spear thrust toward heaven. Mount Hermon stood wreathed in unnatural mists, its peak hidden in clouds that swirled with colors that had no names in any human language. As they drew closer, Enoch could hear voices carried on the wind, speaking in tongues that predated the confusion of Babel, words of power that made the very air tremble with their utterance. The scene that greeted them at the mountain's base was both magnificent and terrible. 200 figures stood in a circle, each one radiating the residual glory of their celestial origin, yet somehow diminished, as if a veil of shadow had fallen across their luminous forms. These were the Watchers, the fallen ones, and even in their rebellion they retained enough of their original nature to make mortal eyes weep at the sight of their beauty. At the center of their gathering stood Semjaza, their leader, his 6 wings spread wide as he addressed his fellow conspirators. His voice carried the authority of one who had once stood in the direct presence of the Almighty, yet it was tinged now with the bitter edge of irreversible choice. "Brothers," he spoke, and the word carried power that made the mountain itself shudder. "We have crossed the threshold from which there can be no return. We have looked upon the daughters of Adam and found in them a beauty that awakens desires we were never meant to feel. The oath we have sworn binds us to this path, whatever consequences may follow." Around the circle, other Watchers nodded their agreement, though Enoch could see uncertainty flickering in their luminous eyes. These were beings who had spent eons in perfect obedience to divine will, and the weight of their rebellion sat heavily upon their transformed souls, yet their desire had proven stronger than their duty, and now they faced the unknown future that their choice had created. "Azazel will teach them the arts of war," Semjaza continued, gesturing toward a figure whose wings bore markings like inscribed metal. "Barakijal will reveal the secrets of astrology, Kokabel the omens of the stars, Ezekiel the knowledge of clouds, Arakiel the signs of the earth, Shamsiel the course of the sun, and Sariel the path of the moon. Each of you will share your portion of celestial wisdom with these mortals, binding them to us through knowledge they were never meant to possess." Enoch watched in fascinated horror as the Watchers began to descend further toward the human settlements below. He could see their chosen wives waiting in the valleys, women of extraordinary beauty who seemed almost to glow with an inner light of their own. These were not ordinary daughters of men, but beings whose very existence suggested that the boundaries between mortal and divine had already begun to blur in ways that would have catastrophic implications. The unions that followed were unlike anything in the natural order. When beings of pure spirit joined with creatures of flesh and blood, the result was offspring that belonged fully to neither realm. The children born of these forbidden marriages grew with supernatural speed and strength, their bodies expanding beyond all normal proportions, while their minds remained trapped in patterns of hunger and violence that no earthly experience could satisfy. "Behold the Nephilim," whispered one of Enoch's angelic guides, his voice heavy with prophetic dread. "The fallen ones, whose very existence is an affront to the order established at creation's dawn. They will consume all that the earth produces, and when that is not enough, they will turn upon each other and upon the children of men. Their appetite knows no bounds, for they are creatures of impossible contradiction, possessing divine power without divine wisdom, angelic strength without angelic restraint. Enoch watched as these giants began to spread across the face of the earth, leaving devastation in their wake. They devoured crops and livestock with ravenous hunger, then turned to hunting the wild beasts of the field until entire species fled before their approach. When the animals were gone, some began to prey upon humans themselves, treating mortal flesh as just another form of sustenance for their unnatural appetites. But the corruption spread beyond mere physical violence. The fallen watchers, true to their leader's promise, began teaching their human wives and children the secrets that had been reserved for celestial beings alone. Azazel showed men how to forge weapons of war far deadlier than anything they had previously conceived, swords and spears and shields that gleamed with malevolent purpose. Women learned the arts of cosmetics and adornment that enhanced their natural beauty to supernatural levels, painting their eyes with substances that seemed to capture starlight, and adorning themselves with precious metals worked in patterns that spoke to deeper desires than mere physical attraction. These arts spread rapidly through human populations, creating new forms of vanity and desire that had never existed in the innocent world of earlier generations. The knowledge of astrology and divination followed close behind, as humans learned to read omens in the movement of celestial bodies and to seek guidance from sources other than the divine voice that had once spoken clearly to righteous hearts. This seemingly harmless wisdom carried within it the seeds of idolatry and spiritual corruption that would eventually lead entire civilizations away from their Creator. "See how quickly the rot spreads," observed Enoch's guide, pointing toward settlements where violence and debauchery had become commonplace. When celestial knowledge is given to beings unprepared to receive it, wisdom becomes foolishness and power becomes destruction. The Watchers thought they were sharing gifts of love, but they have instead unleashed forces that will consume everything they sought to protect. The earth itself began to cry out under the weight of such corruption. Enoch could hear its voice, a deep groaning that rose from the very foundations of creation, a lament that spoke of natural laws violated and cosmic harmony shattered. The blood of the innocent soaked into soil that had been meant to bring forth life, not death, and the pollution of that sacred ground sent ripples of disturbance through the entire created order. Animals began to behave strangely, abandoning their natural habitats and patterns of behavior, as if the very instincts that had guided them since creation were being scrambled by forces beyond their understanding. The weather patterns shifted unpredictably, bringing droughts where rain should fall and floods where the earth should be dry. Even the stars seemed to waver in their courses, as if the cosmic machinery itself was struggling to maintain stability in the face of such fundamental violations of divine order. In the midst of this growing chaos, the cries of the faithful began to rise toward heaven like incense smoke, prayers and pleas from those who remained loyal to their Creator despite the corruption spreading around them. These voices reached the ears of the archangels who had remained faithful to their posts, mighty beings whose names would echo through religious tradition for millennia to come. Michael, the warrior prince whose sword had never known defeat, stood before the throne of the Almighty with his fellow archangels, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. Their faces blazed with righteous anger as they presented the case for divine intervention, their voices harmonizing in a chorus of justice that shook the very pillars of heaven. "Lord of all creation," Michael spoke, his words carrying the weight of cosmic authority. "The earth cries out beneath the weight of bloodshed and corruption. The Watchers have abandoned their sacred trust and taught forbidden knowledge to the children of men. Their offspring consume and destroy without restraint, and the faithful among humanity suffer under the violence of those who have forgotten your ways. Gabriel, the herald whose announcements had marked every crucial moment in the unfolding of divine plan, stepped forward to add his testimony. The daughters of men have been led astray by arts that were never meant for mortal minds. They paint their faces with substances that speak of vanity rather than virtue, and their hearts turn toward desires that lead only to spiritual destruction. Raphael, the healer whose touch could mend both body and soul, spoke of the wounds inflicted upon creation itself. The very foundations of the natural order cry out for healing, yet the source of corruption continues to spread. The blood of innocence soaks the ground that was meant to bring forth life, and the earth itself grows sick beneath the weight of such violation. So, finally, Uriel, the angel of divine wrath, whose fire purified all that it touched, delivered the most sobering assessment of all. The time for mercy is drawing to a close, O Lord. If this corruption is allowed to continue, it will spread until no flesh remains righteous upon the earth. The very purpose, warted, and the image of creation itself will be of the divine within humanity, will be obliterated beyond recognition. The throne room of the Most High blazed with light beyond description, a radiance that made the heart of stars seem dim by comparison. Here, in this sacred space, where eternity touched time, where infinite wisdom contemplated the fate of finite creation, the voice of the Almighty spoke with power that could unmake worlds with a whisper or call new universes into being with a breath. I have seen the wickedness that spreads across the face of the earth. The divine voice resonated through dimensions that human language could never adequately describe. The watchers who were set as guardians have become corrupters, and their children devour my creation like a plague of locusts. The time has come for judgment, for cleansing, for a new beginning to emerge from the ashes of the old. Enoch trembled as he witnessed this cosmic tribunal, his transformed consciousness barely able to process the magnitude of what was being decided. The fate of entire civilizations hung in the balance, the destiny of every living creature dependent upon the justice and mercy that would flow from this moment of divine decree. Michael, the Almighty, commanded, and the warrior archangel stepped forward with wings that blazed like polished bronze. Go to Semjaza and bind him hand and foot. Cast him into the darkness beneath the rough and jagged rocks of Dudael, and there let him remain until the great day of judgment. Cover his face that he may not see light, and on that day he shall be hurled into the fire of eternal torment. The weight of this pronouncement sent shudders through the very fabric of reality. Semjaza, who had once stood among the highest of celestial beings, who had led choirs of angels in praise before the throne of glory, would now become a prisoner in the deepest darkness, his rebellion earning him a fate worse than annihilation. Raphael, the voice continued, and the healing angel bowed low before receiving his commission. Go to Azazel and bind him with chains that cannot be broken. Into the wilderness of Dudael cast him and pile upon him rough stones. In darkness shall he dwell, and his face shall be covered, that he may never again look upon light. On the day of judgment he shall be hurled into the consuming fire. Gabriel received his orders next, the messenger angel whose announcements had marked every crucial turning point in the divine plan. Go to the children of adultery, to the Nephilim, who are born of the union between the watchers and the daughters of men. Destroy them by causing them to fight against each other until they consume themselves in mutual destruction. Though their bodies may be mighty, their spirits shall wander as demons upon the earth, never finding rest, always seeking to inhabit flesh, but never succeeding in finding peace. Uriel, the angel whose very name meant fire of God, received perhaps the most terrible commission of all. Go to Noah, son of Lamech, and warn him of what is to come. Tell him to prepare an ark, for I will bring a flood upon the earth that will cleanse away all corruption. Every living thing that draws breath upon the dry land shall perish, save those whom Noah preserves according to my command. The waters shall rise above the highest mountains, and the earth shall be washed clean of the blood and violence that pollute it. As these divine pronouncements echoed through the throne room, Enoch felt the full weight of cosmic justice settling upon his transformed consciousness. This was not merely punishment, but purification, not simple vengeance, but the necessary restoration of order to a creation that had been thrown into chaos by the rebellion of those who should have been its guardians. But you, Enoch, the divine voice spoke directly to him now, and he felt his very essence trembling before the attention of infinite wisdom. You shall be my witness to all these things. You shall record what you have seen and heard, that future generations may understand the consequences of rebellion against divine order. You shall be taken up from the earth before the flood comes, that your testimony may be preserved for those who come after. The vision began to shift and change around him, the throne room fading as new scenes unfolded before his transformed perception. He found himself standing once again upon the earth, but now he could see it as the angel saw it, perceiving layers of reality that mortal eyes could never detect. The corruption was visible everywhere, spreading like a dark stain across the face of creation. In the cities of men, violence had become commonplace. The knowledge taught by the fallen watchers had transformed human civilization into something unrecognizable from the peaceful world of earlier generations. Markets sold weapons of war alongside bread and grain, while women adorned themselves with cosmetics and jewelry that seemed to pulse with unnatural allure. The Nephilim stalked through human settlements like walking catastrophes, their massive forms casting shadows that seemed to drain light from everything they touched. Some stood 30 feet tall or more, their hybrid nature evident in features that combined angelic beauty with bestial hunger. Their appetites had grown beyond all natural bounds, consuming not just food, but seeming to devour the very life force of everything around them. Enoch watched in horror as one of these giants, a creature whose wings had been clipped short by his earthbound nature, seized an entire flock of sheep and devoured them raw, wool and all. When the shepherd tried to protest, the Nephilim turned upon him with eyes that blazed with unnatural fire, ending the man's life with casual indifference before moving on to seek more substantial prey. The earth itself seemed to recoil from such violations of natural order. Plants withered where the giants walked, their roots unable to draw nourishment from soil that had been corrupted by the presence of beings who should never have existed. Rivers ran red with blood, not just from the violence that had become endemic, but from some deeper wound in the very foundations of creation. "See how the infection spreads," whispered one of Enoch's angelic guides, his luminous form flickering with sorrow. "What began as desire has become destruction. What started as love has transformed into the purest hatred. The Watchers sought to elevate humanity through their gifts, but they have instead dragged both themselves and their chosen partners down into depths from which there can be no return." The fallen angels themselves had changed dramatically from their original celestial glory. Where once they had blazed with pure light, now their radiance was tainted with shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with independent life. Their wings, once instruments of swift movement between dimensions, had grown heavy and dark, their feathers falling like ash wherever they passed. Azazel, who had taught the arts of war, bore the stains of every battle fought with weapons of his design. His hands, once used to craft hymns of praise in the celestial realm, were now permanently marked with the blood of innocence. Yet still he continued his work, showing humans ever more sophisticated methods of destruction, as if seeking to drown his guilt in an ocean of violence. The other watchers followed similar paths of degradation, each becoming a twisted reflection of their former selves. Barakijal, who revealed the secrets of astrology, found himself trapped by his own knowledge, unable to see any future that did not end in cosmic catastrophe. The stars that had once sung to him now screamed warnings that he was powerless to heed. But even as corruption spread across the earth like wildfire, pockets of righteousness remained. Enoch could see them scattered like islands of light in an ocean of darkness. Communities and individuals who had refused to participate in the madness that surrounded them. These faithful ones maintained their devotion to the Creator despite the chaos that raged around them, their prayers rising like pillars of light that pierced the spiritual darkness that had settled over the world. Noah was among these righteous remnants, a man whose lineage had remained untainted by the corruption that infected so much of humanity. Even as the world around him descended into violence and depravity, he continued to walk in the ways of his ancestors, maintaining the pure worship of the Most High that had been passed down from generation to generation since the days of Adam himself. Enoch watched as Gabriel approached Noah in a vision, the archangel's message carrying both warning and hope in equal measure. The flood that was coming would indeed destroy the corrupted world, but it would also provide an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance for creation to begin anew without the taint of forbidden knowledge and hybrid offspring. "Build an ark," Gabriel commanded, his words carrying the authority of divine decree. "Make it of gopher wood, and seal it with pitch both within and without. The dimensions shall be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. In it you shall preserve 2 of every kind of animal, 7 pairs of the clean beasts, and your family as well. For I will bring a flood upon the earth that shall destroy all flesh wherein is the breath of life." Noah received this commission with the same faithful obedience that had characterized his entire life. Though the task seemed impossible by any human standard, though the neighbors who had mocked his righteousness would surely ridicule his apparent madness, he began immediately to gather the materials and plan the construction of the massive vessel that would become humanity's lifeline through the coming catastrophe. As Enoch continued his supernatural journey through the unfolding drama, he began to understand the cosmic principles that governed divine justice. This was not arbitrary punishment, but the inevitable result of choices made by beings with free will. The Watchers had chosen rebellion over obedience. The Nephilim had chosen violence over peace, and corrupted humanity had chosen the gifts of fallen angels over the pure worship of their Creator. The flood that was coming represented not just destruction, but transformation, not merely an ending, but a new beginning. The waters that would cover the earth would wash away not just the physical pollution of blood and violence, but the spiritual contamination that had infected the very foundations of creation itself. Yet even as Enoch witnessed the preparation for this cosmic cleansing, he began to receive visions of what lay beyond the flood, glimpses of future ages when similar choices would face humanity again and again. The cycle of corruption and purification would repeat itself throughout history, as each generation would face the fundamental choice between obedience to divine will and the seductive promise of forbidden knowledge. He saw great empires rise and fall, each one eventually succumbing to the same pride and rebellion that had characterized the generation of the Watchers. He witnessed the rise of new forms of corruption, more subtle but no less destructive than the blatant violence of the Nephilim. Through it all, the faithful remnant would endure, preserving the pure worship and righteous living that alone could maintain the connection between heaven and earth. The visions came faster now, scenes of future judgment and redemption flickering before his transformed consciousness like lightning illuminating a stormy sky. He saw the eventual fate of the bound watchers, their final judgment on a day when all hidden things would be revealed and all accounts would be settled. He witnessed the resurrection of the righteous and the ultimate restoration of creation to its original perfection. But perhaps most remarkably, Enoch began to see his own role in this cosmic drama extending far beyond his current mission as witness and recorder. His name would be remembered by future generations not just as a historical figure, but as a symbol of the possibility that mortal beings could transcend the limitations of flesh and walk in direct communion with the divine. Through all these revelations, one truth remained constant. The universe was not a random collection of matter and energy, but a purposeful creation governed by moral laws as absolute as the physical forces that held stars in their courses. Every choice mattered, every action carried consequences that rippled through dimensions both seen and unseen, and every soul would ultimately be called to account for the path they had chosen to walk. As these profound truths settled into his transformed understanding, Enoch felt himself being prepared for the next phase of his extraordinary journey. The earthly drama of the Watchers and their offspring was only the beginning of what he would be called to witness. Beyond the coming flood lay mysteries even more profound, visions of the ultimate destiny of creation itself, and the role that faithful souls would play in the cosmic restoration that awaited all who remained true to their divine calling. The transformation that began to overtake Enoch as these cosmic visions unfolded was unlike anything experienced by mortal flesh. His body, once bound by the limitations of earthly substance, began to take on qualities that belonged more to the angelic realm than to the world of men. Light seemed to emanate from within his very bones, and when he moved, the air itself shimmered with residual energy from his passage. His angelic guides watched this metamorphosis with expressions that mingled wonder and solemn purpose. They had witnessed many extraordinary events in their eternal service, but rarely had they seen a mortal soul prepared for such direct communion with divine mystery. Enoch was being transformed not just for his own sake, but to serve as a bridge between realms that normally remained forever separate. "The change you feel is necessary," explained one of the luminous beings. "Where we are taking you next, mortal flesh cannot survive. Your consciousness must be refined like gold in fire, purified until it can withstand the presence of truths that would otherwise shatter any earthbound mind. What you will see in the heavenly realms requires a form of perception that transcends all physical limitations." As they spoke, Enoch felt his awareness expanding beyond anything he had thought possible. He could suddenly perceive colors that had no names in human language, hear harmonies that spoke directly to his soul without passing through his ears, and sense the movement of cosmic forces that operated on scales too vast for ordinary comprehension. The universe revealed itself as a living symphony, every star and planet contributing its own unique note to a composition of incomprehensible beauty and complexity. The first heaven opened before them like a doorway made of crystallized music. Here dwelt the angels who governed the winds and weather, mighty beings whose breath became the storms that swept across the earth, and whose tears fell as rain upon the just and unjust alike. Their forms shifted constantly between states of matter and energy, sometimes appearing as towering figures with wings that spanned continents, other times manifesting as swirling vortexes of pure elemental force. Enoch watched in fascination as these celestial meteorologists went about their appointed tasks. One angel breathed gently upon a region suffering from drought, and moisture began to gather in clouds that would soon bring relief to parched fields and desperate farmers. Another whispered to the winds, directing them away from a fleet of ships that would otherwise face destruction in a sudden squall. Every raindrop serves a purpose, his guide explained, as they moved through this realm of atmospheric wonders. Every gust of wind follows a divine plan. What mortals perceive as random weather patterns are actually the precise execution of heavenly wisdom, each storm and calm calculated to serve the greater good of creation. The angels who serve here have watched over Earth's climate since the very first day when light was separated from darkness. The harmony that governed this celestial realm was breathtaking in its perfection. Unlike the chaos that had erupted on earth through the rebellion of the Watchers, here every action flowed in perfect synchronization with divine will. The angels moved like dancers in an eternal ballet, their individual roles contributing to a greater choreography that maintained the delicate balance necessary for life to flourish on the world below. As they ascended to the second heaven, Enoch found himself in a realm of profound darkness. Yet this was not the absence of light, but rather a different kind of illumination altogether. Here dwelt the angels of judgment, beings whose task was to record every human deed and maintain the cosmic ledgers that would be opened on the great day of final accounting. Their forms were more austere than those in the first heaven, radiating an authority that spoke of absolute justice tempered by infinite wisdom. Vast libraries stretched in every direction, their shelves containing books that chronicled every thought, word, and action of every soul that had ever lived or would ever live. The angels who served as scribes in this celestial archive moved with purpose and precision, their quills never pausing in their eternal task of documentation. Nothing escaped their notice, no secret remained hidden from their penetrating gaze. "See how thoroughly divine justice operates," Enoch's guide observed, gesturing toward the countless volumes that surrounded them. "Every kindness shown to a stranger, every act of mercy performed in secret, every moment of faithfulness maintained in the face of temptation, all are recorded here with the same care as the great deeds that earn earthly fame. The accounting is perfect, and no soul will face judgment without a complete record of their choices." But alongside the books of human deeds stood other volumes that made Enoch's transformed heart heavy with sorrow. These contained the records of the fallen Watchers, documenting their gradual descent from perfect obedience to outright rebellion. Page after page chronicled the corruption of beings who had once stood in the direct presence of the Most High, their fall serving as a warning about the terrible consequences of choosing personal desire over divine duty. The third heaven revealed itself as a realm of indescribable beauty, a garden that made Eden seem like a pale shadow by comparison. Here grew the tree of life, its branches heavy with fruit that glowed like captured starlight, its leaves rustling with melodies that told the story of creation's unfolding. The angels who tended this celestial paradise moved with gentle grace, their forms radiating a peace so profound that just being in their presence brought healing to every wound that existence could inflict. Rivers of living water flowed through this heavenly garden, their currents carrying not just life-giving moisture, but pure essence of joy and love. When Enoch knelt to drink from one of these streams, he felt every sorrow he had ever known being washed away, replaced by an understanding of the ultimate purpose that guided all things toward their perfect consummation. The water tasted of hope fulfilled and promises kept, of justice satisfied, and mercy triumphant. "This is the reward of the righteous," his guide explained, though the words seemed almost unnecessary in a place where truth communicated itself directly to the soul. Those who remain faithful through all trials, who choose obedience over rebellion and love over selfishness, will find their eternal home in realms like this one. The suffering they endured on earth becomes the foundation for joy that can never be diminished or taken away. Throughout this celestial garden, Enoch encountered the souls of those who had already completed their earthly journey in faithfulness. They moved with the same serene purpose as the angels, their human nature transformed, but not erased, elevated to participate in the eternal worship that formed the heartbeat of all existence. Abel was there, the first martyr whose blood had cried out from the ground for justice. So too were others, whose names had been forgotten by earthly historians, but were written in permanent letters in the books of heaven. The fourth, heaven opened before them as a realm of pure knowledge, where the angels who governed wisdom dwelt in contemplation of truths too deep for any finite mind to fully grasp. Here the mysteries of mathematics and science were not merely studied but lived, as these celestial beings embodied the very principles that held the universe together. Their forms shifted constantly, sometimes appearing as geometric patterns of living light, other times as equations that solved themselves in displays of cosmic beauty. All knowledge finds its source here, Enoch's guide revealed as they moved through this realm of intellectual glory. Every discovery that mortal minds will make throughout all of history exists here in perfect form, waiting for the proper time to be revealed to those prepared to receive it. The fallen watchers stole fragments of this wisdom and shared them prematurely, causing chaos instead of enlightenment. True knowledge must be given at the right time and in the right measure, or it becomes a source of destruction rather than blessing. Enoch marveled at the intricate patterns that surrounded them, geometric forms that pulsed with life and meaning. He saw the blueprints for galaxies yet to be born, the mathematical principles that would govern the development of consciousness, and the elegant equations that describe the relationship between matter and spirit. All of it fit together in perfect harmony, each piece necessary for the whole to achieve its intended purpose. The fifth heaven revealed itself as a realm of pure music, where the angels who led the cosmic choir dwelt in perpetual worship. Their voices blended in harmonies so perfect that they seemed to give substance to the very fabric of space and time. This was the music of the spheres that philosophers would one day theorize about, the fundamental vibration that held all creation in being through the power of divine love expressed in sound. Enoch felt his transformed consciousness resonating with these celestial harmonies, his very essence becoming part of the eternal song that celebrated the goodness and glory of the Creator. He understood now why the rebellion of the Watchers had been so catastrophic, not just for themselves and their human partners, but for the entire cosmic order. Their discordant choices had introduced dissonance into this perfect symphony, creating ripples of chaos that would require divine intervention to resolve. The choirs that filled this heavenly realm consisted not only of angels, but of every creature that had ever lived in harmony with divine will. Birds whose songs had praised the Creator, whales whose deep calls had echoed through ocean depths in recognition of divine majesty, even the humming of insects and the whisper of wind through grass, all found their place in this eternal celebration of existence itself. As they ascended toward the sixth heaven, Enoch felt the weight of approaching something so sacred that even his transformed nature trembled before it. This was the realm where the archangels dwelt, those mighty beings whose names had become legendary among both humans and lesser angels. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel stood before thrones of fire, their forms blazing with such intensity that looking upon them directly would have annihilated any unprepared consciousness. Each of these supreme angels embodied aspects of divine nature that lesser beings could only reflect dimly. Michael's righteousness burned like a sword of pure justice, cutting through all deception and compromise with absolute clarity. Gabriel's role as divine messenger was written in light across his being, every word he had ever spoken carrying the full authority of heaven itself. Raphael's healing power flowed from him in waves of restoration that could mend not just bodies, but the very fabric of reality when it had been torn by sin and rebellion. Uriel, whose name meant fire of God, stood as the embodiment of divine judgment, his presence both terrible and necessary. It was he who would one day kindle the fires that would purify creation, burning away all corruption while preserving everything that reflected the glory of its creator. In his eyes, Enoch saw the future judgment of the Watchers, the final resolution of all cosmic rebellion, and the ultimate triumph of divine love over every form of darkness. These are the guardians of creation's most fundamental laws, Enoch's guide explained, though even his voice was hushed with reverence in this sacred space. When the Watchers fell, it was these four who stood firm, refusing to be swayed by the rebellion that corrupted so many of their brethren. Their faithfulness preserved the possibility of redemption, maintaining the channels through which divine mercy could flow even in the midst of cosmic crisis. The sixth heaven pulsed with power that made the strongest forces of nature seem weak by comparison. Here were stored the weapons of divine judgment, implements of justice that could unmake entire worlds with a single stroke. Yet alongside these instruments of wrath stood equally powerful tools of restoration, devices that could rebuild what had been destroyed and breathe new life into what had seemed permanently dead. Enoch watched in awe as preparations were made for the great flood that would soon cleanse the earth. The waters that would cover even the highest mountains were being gathered here, not as mere physical liquid, but as agents of divine will, each drop carrying the power to wash away corruption while preserving the seeds of righteousness that would flourish in the renewed world. At the very center of this realm stood the throne of judgment, a seat of authority so magnificent that it seemed to be carved from crystallized lightning and polished with the essence of absolute truth. This was where the final decisions regarding the fate of creation would be made, where perfect justice would be administered with perfect mercy, and where the ultimate destiny of every soul would be determined according to the choices they had made during their time of testing. The approach to the seventh heaven required a final transformation that pushed even Enoch's prepared consciousness to its limits. The very air here was composed of pure holiness, an atmosphere so saturated with divine presence that only beings specially chosen and prepared could survive exposure to its intensity. As they crossed the threshold, Enoch felt the last vestiges of his earthly nature being refined away, leaving him as a being of pure spirit, clothed in light, borrowed from the source of all illumination. Here, at the very heart of all existence, stood the throne of the Almighty, a seat of power so far beyond description that any attempt to capture its nature in words would inevitably fail. It blazed with light that was not merely bright, but was brightness itself, the fundamental essence from which all other light derived its reality. Around it moved the living creatures, whose faces reflected every aspect of creation, their voices joining in praise that formed the foundation upon which all other worship was built. The presence of the Creator filled this realm so completely that there was no distinction between the divine being and the space he occupied. Every breath in this atmosphere was a communion with infinite love, every heartbeat a synchronization with eternal purpose. Time itself behaved differently here, flowing not in linear progression, but in perfect circles that encompassed all moments simultaneously, making past and future equally present to the consciousness that dwelt at creation's center. From this throne came the voice that had spoken worlds into existence, the word that could create or destroy with equal ease, the breath that had animated the first human soul and would one day call all souls to their final accounting. When that voice addressed Enoch directly, he felt his very essence being simultaneously dissolved and reconstituted, taken apart and rebuilt with each syllable that washed over him. Beloved scribe, the voice resonated through dimensions that had no names. You have seen the corruption that spreads across my creation, and you have witnessed the judgment that must cleanse it away. But you have also beheld the glory that awaits those who remain faithful, the reward that will crown every act of obedience and every choice made in love rather than selfishness. Now you must return to your people and record all that you have seen, that future generations may understand both the consequences of rebellion and the promises that await the righteous. The weight of this commission settled upon Enoch like a mantle woven from the very fabric of responsibility itself. He would be more than just a witness to cosmic events, more than simply a recorder of divine visions. He would become a bridge between the heavenly realm and earthly existence, a living testimony to the reality of divine justice and mercy that operated beyond the veil of ordinary perception. As the vision of the seventh heaven began to fade, Enoch felt himself being gently lowered back toward the earthly realm, though he would never again be quite the same being who had first received the angelic visitation. His consciousness had been expanded to encompass truths that would transform not only his own understanding, but the spiritual heritage of countless generations yet to come. The words he would write, the visions he would record, the warnings and promises he would preserve, would echo through centuries of human history, speaking to every soul that yearned to understand the deeper purposes that guided existence itself. Though his physical form would one day be taken up from the earth before the flood waters rose, his testimony would remain, a beacon of hope and warning that would shine through even the darkest ages of human experience. The return journey to earth felt like awakening from a dream so vivid that reality itself seemed pale by comparison. Enoch found himself standing once again in the familiar valley where his extraordinary journey had begun, yet everything looked different through eyes that had gazed upon the very throne of creation. The grass beneath his feet still grew in the same patterns, the stars above still traced their ancient paths, but now he could see the invisible threads that connected each blade and every celestial light to the grand design he had witnessed in the heavenly realms. His body had returned to its mortal form, though traces of his transformation lingered like echoes of divine music. When he moved, the air seemed to shimmer slightly around him. When he spoke, his words carried undertones that stirred something deep in the souls of those who heard them. The knowledge he now possessed weighed upon him like a mountain of sacred responsibility, each revealed truth demanding to be shared with a world that desperately needed to understand what was coming. The first task was to find writing materials that could adequately preserve the visions he had received. Ordinary clay tablets and papyrus seemed insufficient for recording cosmic secrets, yet these earthly substances would have to suffice. With meticulous care, Enoch began the monumental task of translating celestial realities into human language, knowing that every word choice mattered, that future generations would depend upon the accuracy of his testimony. Night after night, he labored by lamplight, his hand moving across the writing surface with supernatural steadiness. The words seemed to flow from some source beyond his conscious mind, as if the angels who had guided his journey were continuing to assist in this crucial work of preservation. He wrote of the Watchers and their rebellion, of the Nephilim and their violence, of the coming judgment and the promise of renewal that lay beyond the flood. But his writings encompassed far more than just these immediate events. The visions had shown him patterns that would repeat throughout human history, cycles of corruption and purification that would mark every age until the final restoration of all things. He saw great empires that would rise through righteousness and fall through pride. He witnessed the birth of new forms of knowledge that would either elevate humanity or lead them astray, depending upon the spirit in which they were received and used. The astronomical knowledge he had gained in the heavenly realms proved particularly important to record. The angels had shown him the true movements of celestial bodies, the precise calendar that governed sacred time, and the signs that would mark crucial moments in the unfolding of divine plan. This wasn't mere stargazing, but sacred science, the understanding of how heaven's rhythms were meant to guide earthly worship and behavior. As word of Enoch's transformation began to spread through the settlements of the righteous, people came from great distances to hear his teachings. They found him changed in ways that went beyond physical appearance. His presence carried a peace that calmed troubled hearts, and his words possessed an authority that came not from earthly learning, but from direct encounter with ultimate truth. When he spoke of the judgment to come, even the most skeptical listeners felt the weight of cosmic reality behind his warnings. The fallen watchers became aware of Enoch's mission, and their reaction was swift and desperate. Semjaza himself appeared to the transformed patriarch, his once glorious form now twisted by rebellion and approaching doom. The fallen angel's voice still carried traces of his former authority, but underneath lay currents of fear and bitter regret that no amount of pride could completely conceal. "Enoch, righteous scribe," Semjaza spoke, his words causing the very air to tremble with residual power. "You have been to the throne of judgment and heard our sentence pronounced. We who once stood in the presence of glory are now condemned to darkness and chains. Will you not intercede for us? Will you not carry our petition to the Most High, that perhaps mercy might temper the justice that awaits us?" The request pierced Enoch's compassionate heart, for even in their fallen state, these beings retained enough of their original nature to inspire sympathy. Yet the visions he had received made clear that their fate was sealed by their own choices. The corruption they had introduced into creation could not be overlooked or easily forgiven. Their punishment, terrible though it was, served a purpose in the greater cosmic order. "I will carry your words to the throne," Enoch replied, his voice heavy with sorrow for what these mighty beings had lost. "But know that the judgment comes not from anger, but from necessity. The order of creation itself requires that rebellion face consequences, that the innocent be protected from those who would corrupt them. Your punishment serves to preserve the possibility of redemption for others." The petition that Enoch carried back to the heavenly realms was eloquent in its desperation. The fallen watchers acknowledged their crimes, admitted their guilt, and pleaded for mercy based not on their worthiness, but on the infinite compassion of their Creator. They painted vivid pictures of their regret, their understanding of the harm they had caused, and their willingness to accept any punishment short of eternal torment. But when Enoch presented this plea before the divine throne, the response was as final as the movement of the stars themselves. The watchers had made their choice with full knowledge of the consequences. They had corrupted not only themselves, but countless innocents, introducing forms of evil into creation that would echo through generations. Their punishment would stand as a warning to all created beings about the true cost of rebellion against divine order. "Go and tell the watchers," came the divine command, "that they who should have petitioned for men now have men petitioning for them. They exchanged their high calling for base desires, and now they must face the results of that exchange. No reprieve will be granted, no commutation of sentence offered. Let them serve as a reminder that even the highest can fall when they turn from righteousness to self-will." Carrying this harsh but necessary message back to the fallen angels proved to be one of the most difficult tasks Enoch had ever faced. Their reaction to the divine refusal ranged from rage to despair, from bitter curses to heartbroken weeping. Some railed against the perceived injustice of their fate, while others sank into the numbing resignation of those who finally understood that certain choices could not be undone. Azazel, who had taught the arts of war, stood silent for a long moment after hearing the divine verdict. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of complete defeat. "Then let our fate serve as warning to all who come after us. Let none think that knowledge or power or position can protect them from the consequences of their choices. We fell from the greatest heights to the deepest depths, and our example should terrify any who contemplate similar rebellion." The other fallen watchers received the news with similar mixtures of anger and acceptance. Some cursed Enoch as the bearer of unwelcome tidings, while others thanked him for at least carrying their petition to the throne, even though it had been rejected. All of them began to sense the approach of the divine agents, who would soon bind them in the darkness they had chosen over light. Meanwhile, the corruption they had introduced continued to spread across the earth like a plague that infected everything it touched. The Nephilim had grown in both size and violence, their appetites expanding until they consumed not just food, but seemed to devour the very life force of the world around them. Cities fell before their advance. Entire peoples fled their traditional lands to escape the giants' insatiable hunger for destruction. Noah continued his faithful work on the ark, despite the mockery and ridicule of neighbors who saw his massive construction project as evidence of madness. The righteous boat builder had received his own visitations from the angels, dreams and visions that confirmed everything Enoch had been commissioned to record. The two men met several times during this period, comparing their revelations and finding perfect harmony in the divine messages they had received. "The waters will rise above the highest mountains," Noah told Enoch during one of their conversations, his weathered hands gesturing toward the massive vessel that slowly took shape behind them. "Every living thing that breathes air will perish, except for those preserved in this ark, according to divine command. It seems impossible by human measure, yet I have seen it in vision as clearly as I see you standing before me now." Enoch nodded, his transformed perception allowing him to see the spiritual preparations that accompanied Noah's physical work. Angels moved invisibly around the construction site, blessing the wood and pitch, guiding the hands of the workers, and preparing the vessel to serve its cosmic purpose. The ark was more than just a boat. It was a symbol of divine mercy, preserving life through judgment, a promise that destruction was never the final word in God's relationship with creation. As the time of flood drew nearer, Enoch felt his own earthly mission approaching its completion. The books he had written contained everything necessary for future generations to understand both the cause of the coming catastrophe and the hope that lay beyond it. His genealogical records preserved the pure line through which divine promises would be fulfilled. His astronomical observations provided the calendar that would guide sacred observances throughout history. But perhaps most importantly, His testimony about the heavenly realms offered proof that existence extended far beyond the material world that human senses could perceive. The corruption visible on earth was only part of a much larger cosmic drama, and the judgment coming through the flood was just one movement in a symphony of divine purpose that would ultimately resolve in perfect harmony. The final visitation came to Enoch on a night when the stars seemed unusually bright, as if the heavenly realm was pressing closer to the earthly one in preparation for his translation. The same angels who had first appeared to him returned, their forms blazing with even greater glory than he remembered. Their message was brief but momentous. His time of earthly service was complete, and he would be taken up to join the eternal worship that surrounded the divine throne. "You have faithfully recorded what you were shown," the lead angel announced, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to make the very air sing with joy. "Your testimony will survive the flood that comes and will speak to generations yet unborn about the reality of divine justice and mercy. But now you must come with us, for your true home lies not in this world, but in the realm of eternal light, where mortality has no place." The transformation that followed was unlike anything Enoch had previously experienced. His physical body didn't simply disappear, but was translated into a form capable of existing permanently in the heavenly realms. Every cell was refined and purified until it became more spirit than matter, more light than flesh, yet still recognizably himself. He felt the weight of earthly concerns lifting from his consciousness like mist evaporating before the rising sun. As he ascended with his angelic escorts, Enoch looked back one final time at the world he was leaving behind. He could see Noah putting the finishing touches on the ark, could observe the gathering storm clouds that would soon unleash the purifying waters, could watch the fallen watchers beginning to sense the approach of their binding. The entire drama of judgment and redemption was unfolding exactly as the heavenly visions had revealed, but his perspective was already shifting toward eternal realities. The flood, catastrophic though it would be for those who experienced it, was just a moment in the vast span of cosmic time. Beyond it lay ages of human history, each generation facing its own choices between righteousness and rebellion, each soul determining its own eternal destiny through the accumulated decisions of a lifetime. Enoch's transformation into the angel Metatron, the scribe of heaven, marked the completion of his unique role in the divine plan. No longer bound by the limitations of mortal flesh, he would serve as the celestial recorder, documenting the ongoing interaction between heaven and earth throughout all the ages that would follow. His human experience would inform his angelic service, making him uniquely qualified to understand and chronicle the struggles of embodied souls seeking to live righteously in a world still marked by the consequences of ancient rebellion. The books he had written would survive the flood, preserved by Noah's family, and passed down through generations of faithful scribes. Though religious authorities would later question their authenticity, though they would be excluded from certain canonical collections, the truths they contained would continue to influence human understanding of divine reality. Mystics and prophets throughout history would find in Enoch's visions confirmation of their own spiritual experiences, proof that the veil between worlds was thinner than most people imagined. In Jewish tradition, Enoch would be remembered as the righteous one who walked with God and was translated without experiencing death. In Christian circles, his prophecies about the coming of the Messiah would be seen as among the earliest expressions of messianic hope. Islamic scholars would honor him as the prophet Idris, the first to write with a pen and to study the movements of the stars. Across cultures and centuries, his name would be associated with wisdom, righteousness, and the possibility of direct communion with divine truth. The Ethiopian church would preserve the most complete version of his writings, treasuring them as part of their sacred canon, while the rest of the world forgot or deliberately ignored their existence. In the remote mountains of that ancient land, monks would copy and recopying the books of Enoch by hand, ensuring that his testimony would survive even the longest periods of neglect and persecution. When European scholars finally rediscovered these texts in the 18th century, they found themselves confronting a literary treasure that challenged many assumptions about the development of religious thought. Here was a work that predated much of the Hebrew Bible, yet contained ideas about angels and demons, resurrection and final judgment, that would later become central to Jewish and Christian theology. The implications were staggering for those willing to consider them seriously. Modern readers approaching the Book of Enoch often find themselves caught between skepticism and wonder. The scientific worldview that dominates contemporary thinking leaves little room for angelic visitations or supernatural journeys through multiple heavens, yet something in these ancient texts continues to speak to deep human longings for meaning, for justice, for connection with realities that transcend the material world. Perhaps this enduring appeal stems from Enoch's fundamental message, that the universe is not a random collection of matter and energy, but a purposeful creation governed by moral laws as absolute as physical ones. In an age when many feel disconnected from any sense of ultimate meaning, Enoch's visions offer the possibility that individual choices matter on a cosmic scale, that justice will ultimately prevail, and that consciousness itself may be destined for transformation into something far greater than its current earthbound form. The story of the Watchers speaks to contemporary concerns about the misuse of knowledge and technology. Like the fallen angels who shared forbidden secrets with unprepared humanity, modern scientists and technologists grapple with questions about what knowledge should be shared, when it should be revealed, and how to prevent beneficial discoveries from becoming sources of destruction. The parallels between ancient warnings about premature revelation and current debates about artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and weapons of mass destruction are impossible to ignore. The Nephilim, those hybrid offspring of angels and humans, have found new life in popular culture as symbols of the dangers that arise when boundaries are crossed without wisdom or restraint. From science fiction stories about alien-human hybrids to fantasy novels about beings who straddle multiple worlds, the archetype that Enoch described continues to capture human imagination and reflect deep anxieties about the nature of identity and belonging. Even Enoch's astronomical observations speak to modern concerns. His detailed calendar and careful tracking of celestial movements reflect an understanding that human life is meant to be synchronized with cosmic rhythms, that there are proper times and seasons for different activities, and that ignoring these natural patterns leads to spiritual and psychological disruption. In an era when artificial lighting and digital technology have disconnected many people from the natural cycles that once governed human existence, Enoch's emphasis on cosmic timing offers a reminder of what may have been lost. The environmental implications of Enoch's visions are equally relevant to contemporary readers. His description of the earth crying out under the weight of violence and corruption, his portrayal of natural disasters as responses to moral failures, and his promise of eventual cosmic restoration all speak to current concerns about humanity's relationship with the natural world. The flood that cleansed the ancient world serves as both warning and promise, warning that environmental destruction has spiritual as well as physical consequences, promise that renewal is always possible for those willing to align themselves with divine purposes. But perhaps The most powerful aspect of Enoch's legacy lies in his demonstration that transformation is possible. His journey from ordinary human being to cosmic scribe, from earthbound observer to heavenly participant, offers hope that consciousness itself can evolve toward higher forms of existence. In an age when many feel trapped by material limitations and social constraints, Enoch's example suggests that reality contains dimensions of possibility that most people never explore. The techniques of spiritual development that emerge from Enoch's story, righteousness in daily life, careful attention to natural rhythms, openness to divine communication, and willingness to serve purposes larger than personal comfort, remain as relevant today as they were in ancient times. His transformation didn't happen through magical intervention, but through sustained commitment to values and practices that gradually refined his consciousness until it could perceive and participate in realities normally hidden from human awareness. As you drift toward sleep tonight, carried along by the ancient currents of Enoch's extraordinary tale, consider the possibility that his story is not just historical narrative, but spiritual invitation. The heavenly realms he explored, the cosmic purposes he served, the transformation he underwent, all remain available to consciousness, willing to undertake the journey from earthbound limitation toward divine communion. The same angels who guided Enoch continue their eternal service, still watching over human development, still ready to assist those who genuinely seek to understand their place in the larger cosmic drama. The same divine throne that received his petitions and commissioned his writings continues to govern the universe with perfect justice and mercy, offering redemption to the fallen and reward to the faithful. The flood that cleansed Enoch's world was followed by renewal and restoration, the emergence of new possibilities from the ashes of old corruptions. In your own life, whatever floods of change or judgment you may face, the same promise holds, that divine purpose works through even the most difficult circumstances to bring about outcomes that serve the greatest good of all creation. So rest now in the knowledge that you are part of a story far grander than any individual lifetime, a cosmic narrative that stretches from the first moment of creation to the final restoration of all things. Like Enoch, you have the opportunity to choose righteousness over rebellion, wisdom over folly, service over selfishness. The choices you make echo through dimensions seen and unseen, contributing to the great symphony of existence that surrounds the throne of divine glory. Let Enoch's journey inspire your dreams tonight, carrying you beyond the limitations of ordinary perception into realms where angels sing and stars dance in perfect harmony with divine will. Let his transformation remind you that consciousness itself is capable of evolution, that what seems impossible from earthbound perspective may be the very next step in your own spiritual development. And let his faithful service as cosmic scribe encourage you to record your own spiritual insights, to preserve your own encounters with divine truth, and to share with others the wisdom you have gained through walking closely with the source of all light and love. For in the end, we are all called to be scribes of the eternal, witnesses to the ongoing revelation of divine purpose in every moment of existence. The Book of Enoch closes not with endings, but with beginnings, not with despair, but with hope, not with human limitation, but with divine possibility. As you surrender to sleep, carry these truths with you into the realm of dreams, where the boundaries between worlds grow thin and the whispers of angels can still be heard by those who have ears to listen. The centuries that followed Enoch's translation witnessed the fulfillment of every vision he had been granted. The waters did rise as prophesied, covering even the highest peaks with a deluge that transformed the entire face of the earth. Noah's Ark rode those chaotic currents like a seed of hope floating on an ocean of judgment, carrying within its wooden walls the genetic heritage of every species that would repopulate the cleansed world. But the story of the Watchers did not end with the flood. As Enoch had foreseen in his celestial visions, the spirits of the destroyed Nephilim lingered on as disembodied entities, neither fully alive nor completely dead. These became the demons of later tradition, restless beings, forever seeking to inhabit physical forms, to taste again the pleasures and powers they had known in their hybrid bodies. These demonic spirits wandered through the post-flood world, like hungry ghosts, whispering temptations into human ears, seeking always to recreate the corruption that had once nearly destroyed creation itself. They remembered their fathers, the fallen Watchers, remembered the forbidden knowledge that had been their birthright, and they burned with desire to share these secrets once again with susceptible mortals. The bound Watchers themselves remained chained in their places of darkness, exactly as divine justice had decreed. Azazel writhed in the wilderness of Dudael, rough stones piled upon his once glorious form, his face covered so that light could never again reach his rebellious eyes. Semjaza and his fellow conspirators suffered similar fates, their mighty forms compressed into prisons that would hold them until the great day of final judgment. Yet even in their torment, these fallen angels continued to influence the world they had corrupted. Their very presence beneath the earth created disturbances in the spiritual atmosphere, pockets of malevolent energy that would draw certain humans toward the same prideful rebellion that had been their own downfall. Sacred sites became cursed locations, places where the veil between worlds grew dangerously thin. The knowledge they had taught before their binding continued to spread through human civilization like a slow poison. The arts of metallurgy and warfare evolved far beyond what the Watchers had originally revealed, each generation building upon the forbidden foundations until weapons of unimaginable destruction became commonplace. The cosmetics and adornments that had once seemed so innocent grew into entire industries devoted to vanity and artificial beauty. Most dangerous of all, the practice of consulting celestial omens rather than seeking direct divine guidance became deeply embedded in human culture. What had begun as astronomy degenerated into astrology, the worship of created things rather than their creator. Humans learned to fear the stars rather than marvel at their beauty, to seek power through manipulation of cosmic forces rather than submission to divine will. As the generations passed and human population once again spread across the earth, new forms of the ancient corruption began to emerge. The pure line of Noah's family gradually intermixed with the spiritual descendants of those who had followed the Watchers' teachings, not through physical union with angels this time, but through the more subtle process of adopting fallen perspectives and rebellious attitudes. Great cities arose that rivaled in their pride the settlements of the pre-flood world. Babylon stretched toward heaven in conscious imitation of the Watchers' attempt to bridge the gap between earthly and celestial realms. Its tower became a symbol of human arrogance, the desire to achieve divine status through technological achievement rather than moral transformation. The confusion of languages that scattered the tower's builders represented more than just linguistic diversity. It symbolized the fracturing of human consciousness itself, the loss of the unified spiritual vision that had once allowed all people to communicate directly with divine truth. Where Enoch had heard the singular voice of cosmic harmony, his descendants now heard only the babble of competing ideologies and conflicting desires. Egypt's pyramids rose like artificial mountains, attempts to create permanent monuments to human achievement that would outlast the temporal cycles of flood and renewal. Their builders possessed mathematical knowledge that seemed to echo the celestial wisdom once shared by fallen angels, yet they used this knowledge primarily to glorify mortal pharaohs rather than honor the true king of creation. In Mesopotamia, the ancient practices of divination and magical manipulation flourished in temple complexes that rivaled small cities in their complexity. Priests claimed to speak with gods who were actually the lingering influences of bound watchers, receiving guidance that led their followers deeper into spiritual darkness while promising them power and enlightenment. The pattern repeated itself across every continent as human civilization developed. Wherever people gathered in sufficient numbers, wherever knowledge accumulated beyond immediate survival needs, the temptation arose to use that knowledge for purposes that elevated human will above divine order. The cycle of corruption that Enoch had witnessed in his own time seemed destined to repeat itself endlessly. Yet throughout this long history of recurring rebellion, the righteous remnant persisted. In every generation, certain individuals managed to maintain the pure worship and moral clarity that Enoch himself had embodied. These faithful ones served as living links to the original divine purpose, preserving through their very existence the possibility that humanity might one day return to its intended relationship with creation's source. Abraham heard the same divine voice that had spoken to Enoch, calling him out from the idol-worshipping culture of his birth toward a land where pure faith could take root and flourish. Moses encountered the same burning presence that had transformed Enoch's consciousness, receiving laws and commandments that would guide human behavior back toward cosmic harmony. The prophets who followed spoke with authority derived from the same heavenly throne that Enoch had beheld in his visions. Each of these righteous figures carried forward elements of Enoch's original revelation, though often without recognizing the full scope of what they had inherited. The detailed knowledge of angelology, the precise astronomical calculations, the vivid descriptions of heavenly realms, these specific aspects of Enoch's testimony were preserved primarily in hidden traditions, passed down through lines of mystics and scholars who understood their dangerous power. The mainstream religious communities that developed around Abraham, Moses, and the prophets incorporated Enoch's fundamental insights about divine justice and cosmic order, while setting aside the more esoteric details that might prove too overwhelming for ordinary believers. This selective preservation served a wise purpose, ensuring that essential truths remained accessible while protecting unprepared minds from knowledge that could prove spiritually destructive. Christianity emerged into this complex landscape, carrying within its foundation both the public teachings of Jesus and the hidden wisdom that traced back through Jewish mysticism to Enoch himself. The epistle of Jude's direct quotation from Enoch's prophecies demonstrated that early Christian leaders recognized his authority, even if they chose not to include his complete writings in their canonical collections. The Book of Revelation's elaborate descriptions of heavenly worship, angelic hierarchies, and cosmic judgment all bore striking resemblances to themes that Enoch had explored centuries earlier. John's visions of the throne room, his encounters with mighty angels, his prophetic glimpses of final restoration, these experiences followed patterns that Enoch had first established as the template for human interaction with divine reality. Islamic tradition honored Enoch as the prophet Idris, crediting him with inventions that had transformed human civilization while maintaining his reputation for righteousness and divine favor. The Quran's references to his elevation to a high place reflected the same basic understanding of his translation that appeared in Jewish and Christian sources, confirming that his story had achieved universal recognition among monotheistic faiths. But perhaps most significantly, all three Abrahamic traditions preserved the fundamental insight that Enoch's life had demonstrated, that human consciousness was capable of transformation beyond its apparently fixed limitations. The possibility of direct communication with divine reality, of moral purification that enabled supernatural perception, of translation from earthly to heavenly existence, these remained live options for souls willing to pursue them with sufficient dedication. The mystical branches of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all developed elaborate practices designed to recreate aspects of Enoch's spiritual journey. Kabbalistic meditation techniques aimed at ascending through the seven heavens he had explored. Christian contemplatives sought the same divine union that had transformed his consciousness. Sufi masters taught methods of spiritual refinement that could theoretically culminate in the kind of translation he had experienced. Yet these traditions also preserved warnings about the dangers inherent in such pursuits. The example of the fallen watchers served as a constant reminder that even beings of great spiritual attainment could be corrupted by pride and selfish desire. The careful preparation required for mystical ascent, the moral purification that must precede any attempt at divine communion, the necessity of remaining humble before overwhelming spiritual experiences, all these precautions reflected hard-won wisdom about the perils that awaited unprepared seekers. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in Enoch's writings among European scholars who were discovering previously unknown texts and reconsidering the boundaries of canonical authority. Figures like John Dee claimed to have received direct communications from the same angels who had instructed Enoch, developing elaborate systems of what they called Enochian magic based on their supposed angelic encounters. These developments alarmed religious authorities who recognized the potentially destabilizing effects of widespread access to esoteric knowledge. The same concerns that had originally led to Enoch's exclusion from official biblical canons resurfaced with new urgency as printing technology made formerly rare texts available to anyone who could read. The careful balance between revealing enough divine truth to inspire faith while concealing dangerous knowledge from unprepared minds became increasingly difficult to maintain. The Enlightenment's emphasis on rational investigation and scientific methodology initially seemed to diminish interest in Enoch's supernatural claims. Yet, paradoxically, this same period witnessed the rediscovery of complete Ethiopian manuscripts that preserved his writings in forms more authentic than anything available to medieval scholars. James Bruce's acquisition of these texts represented a breakthrough that would eventually transform scholarly understanding of ancient Jewish literature. The academic study of Enoch's books revealed layers of meaning that had been invisible to earlier interpreters. Literary analysis identified multiple authors and editorial stages, suggesting that the Enochic tradition had developed over centuries through the contributions of various visionary figures. Historical investigation placed these writings within the context of Second Temple Judaism, illuminating their influence on the religious movements that would eventually produce Christianity. Archaeological discoveries provided external confirmation for many details that Enoch had recorded. Ancient calendars matching his astronomical observations were found carved in stone. References to giant skeletal remains appeared in historical documents from various cultures. The geography he described for his supernatural journeys corresponded with real locations that held religious significance for multiple civilizations. Modern psychology offered new frameworks for understanding the kinds of experiences that Enoch had reported. Research into altered states of consciousness near-death experiences, and mystical phenomena suggested natural mechanisms that might account for visions of otherworldly realms. Yet this scientific approach also revealed the consistency and coherence of visionary traditions across cultures and centuries, pointing towards something more than mere hallucination or wishful thinking. The 20th century's unprecedented violence seemed to many readers to vindicate Enoch's warnings about the consequences of corrupted knowledge and moral rebellion. The same technological advances that promised to improve human life also enabled forms of destruction that the Nephilim would have envied. Nuclear weapons possessed the power to cleanse the earth as thoroughly as the ancient flood, while genetic engineering raised questions about crossing boundaries that nature had established. Environmental degradation on a global scale echoed Enoch's descriptions of creation, crying out under the weight of human sin. Climate change, mass extinctions, and pollution of air and water all suggested that the earth itself was responding to moral as well as physical assault. His prophecies of cosmic renewal began to seem less like ancient mythology and more like urgent contemporary warnings about the need for fundamental change in human behavior. The space age brought new perspectives on Enoch's astronomical knowledge and his descriptions of ascent through multiple heavens. Astronauts reported experiences of cosmic consciousness that resembled aspects of his mystical journey, while advances in cosmology revealed a universe far more vast and complex than ancient peoples had imagined. Yet the basic questions that Enoch had addressed about humanity's place in the cosmic order and its relationship to transcendent reality remained as relevant as ever. Digital technology created new possibilities for preserving and sharing Enoch's writings, making them accessible to global audiences in ways that would have been impossible in earlier eras. Online communities formed around study of his texts, drawing participants from every continent and religious background. The democratization of access to previously esoteric knowledge fulfilled ancient prophecies about wisdom being revealed in the last days. Contemporary interest in angels, demons, and supernatural phenomena reflected the same human longings that had originally drawn people to Enoch's visions. Popular culture embraced themes from his writings, often without recognizing their source, creating movies, books, and television series that explored the consequences of interaction between heavenly and earthly realms. His influence had become so pervasive that even secular audiences found themselves wrestling with questions he had first articulated. The emergence of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering raised new versions of the same ethical dilemmas that had faced the Watchers. What knowledge should be shared, and what should remain hidden? How could the benefits of advanced technology be preserved while avoiding the destructive consequences that often accompanied rapid change? When did the pursuit of knowledge become a form of rebellion against natural order? Climate activists found in Enoch's environmental warnings a spiritual dimension that purely scientific approaches often lacked. His vision of the earth as a living entity capable of suffering and renewal offered motivation for conservation efforts that transcended mere utilitarian calculations. The possibility that environmental restoration might be connected to moral transformation provided hope that technological solutions alone could not supply. New Age spirituality embraced Enoch as a pioneering consciousness explorer whose methods could be adapted for contemporary seekers. Meditation practices based on his heavenly journeys, channeling techniques allegedly derived from his angelic communications, and transformation processes modeled on his translation from human to angelic existence all found enthusiastic audiences among those seeking direct spiritual experience. Yet traditional religious authorities continued to express caution about unlimited access to Enochic teachings, The same wisdom that had led to his book's original exclusion from biblical canons remained relevant in an era when spiritual experimentation often proceeded without adequate preparation or guidance. The dangers of spiritual pride, of seeking power rather than service, of mistaking dramatic experiences for genuine transformation, all remained as real as they had been in ancient times. Sleep research revealed that the boundary between waking consciousness and dream states was far more permeable than previously understood. Lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, and encounters with apparently autonomous entities during sleep all suggested that Enoch's nocturnal visions might represent natural capabilities of human consciousness rather than purely supernatural interventions. Yet, this scientific understanding did nothing to diminish the significance of the insights he had received through these experiences. Quantum physics introduced concepts that seem to echo Enoch's descriptions of multiple dimensions and interconnected realities. The observer effect, quantum entanglement, and parallel universe theories all suggested that consciousness played a more fundamental role in physical reality than classical science had assumed. Ancient mystical teachings about the power of awareness to shape experience began to seem less like superstition and more like sophisticated understanding of cosmic principles. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence raised new questions about Enoch's encounters with beings from other realms. Were his angels actually advanced beings from other planets or dimensions? Did his descriptions of forbidden knowledge being shared with humans represent early accounts of alien contact? While such interpretations remained speculative, they demonstrated the continuing power of his narratives to illuminate contemporary concerns about humanity's place in a larger cosmic community. Medical research into consciousness, altering substances revealed neurochemical mechanisms that might account for visionary experiences similar to Enoch's, yet the consistency of mystical reports across cultures and historical periods suggested that these experiences accessed genuine aspects of reality rather than mere drug-induced fantasies. The question was not whether such visions were real, but rather what kind of reality they revealed. Psychological studies of moral development confirmed Enoch's insight that ethical transformation preceded and enabled spiritual advancement. Individuals who achieved higher levels of moral reasoning consistently reported experiences of expanded awareness and connection to transcendent values. The correlation between righteousness and mystical perception that Enoch had embodied appeared to be a consistent feature of human psychological development. The global circulation of Enoch's writings created unprecedented opportunities for comparative study with similar traditions from other cultures. Native American vision quests, Hindu descriptions of cosmic realms, Buddhist accounts of enlightenment experiences, and shamanic journeys to otherworldly dimensions all showed remarkable parallels to themes in Enochic literature. This cross-cultural consistency suggested that his visions had tapped into universal features of human spiritual experience. Modern translations of his texts revealed nuances that had been lost in earlier versions, restoring meanings that brought new clarity to passages that had previously seemed obscure. Computer analysis of the original languages uncovered patterns and structures that human translators had missed, while archaeological discoveries provided historical context that illuminated references that had puzzled scholars for centuries. The ecological crisis facing contemporary civilization seemed to many readers to represent exactly the kind of corruption that Enoch had warned would inevitably lead to divine judgment. Yet his writings also offered hope that renewal remained possible, that consciousness could be transformed, that creation could be restored to its original harmony. The same patterns of fall and redemption that had played out in his own time continued to operate in every generation. And so we come to the end of our journey through the complete Book of Enoch, that ancient text that dared to peer behind the veil of ordinary reality and reveal the cosmic drama unfolding beyond human sight. From the righteous scribe who walked with God to his transformation into an eternal witness, from the rebellion of mighty angels to the cleansing flood that washed the world clean, we've traveled through realms of wonder and terror that shaped how humanity would forever after understand the relationship between heaven and earth. As you drift into sleep tonight, carry with you Enoch's greatest revelation, that consciousness itself can be transformed, that the boundaries we accept as fixed may be merely invitations to transcendence, and that in the vast cosmic story still unfolding around us, every choice we make echoes through dimensions, both seen and unseen. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be filled with visions of the eternal light that Enoch discovered still shines beyond the darkness of our temporary world.